failed to define who he was thinking or content. And that's a debate because who decided to do religious to constitution.
Hi there.
Secular.
Film Society. My first question, after watching this film, it has so much scope and it covers so much ground. Louder? You hear me? Okay. How did you two come together and form a collaboration and go on this journey together?
Oren and I guess, go back 20 years.
25.
25. I was 10, Oren was 40. Now, Oren and I were making films, actually, our last NEH funding film was about 25 years ago, at about the same time, and we got to know one another through that, and have been friends and have worked together in various projects since then. But and to tell you the truth, Oren had had the idea of doing something on Zionism for a number of years, and at one point he came to me and asked if I wanted to collaborate, and I have done both of the films we've done have been often on Jewish subjects, and I've always been fascinated by the modern Jewish journey and Jewish identity, so it was a natural for me too, and that began the journey, and that was about five years ago, I guess. Is that right?
Actually, we were in a helicopter together in Europe. But yes, that's got it right. Yes.
So there was a quote in the film that just struck out at me. It's the passage of time creates new realities. I'm wondering, because you guys know the subject better than most, and you presented it in such a way. How do you see the passage of time creating new realities in Israel and Palestine?
Wow, that's.
I would rather, rather than answer that question, I think what our film's really more driving at is how the passage of time has changed the reality for Jews in the world, and what Zionism has done. What's that? What Zionism has done for Jews as a people and individually, and I think that's as important of a question as what it's done for Israel, and I think it's transformed the Jewish people in many amazing ways, and it's hard to remember that because we're aware simply of the Palestinian-Israeli reality today, and not that of how the Jewish people have evolved and how individual Jews have evolved through the experience of Israel. That part of it.
Well, I would just say, in terms of your question, in terms of realities, I think there's two sets of realities that are always intermixing in the history of Zionism and the Jewish and the Palestinian people. One is the physical facts, what happens on the ground, facts on the ground, as someone once used the term in terms of the settlements. And then there are the realities of perception. And I think that throughout this history, and what I think we tried to show in the film, is how one is always complexly intermixing with the other. Ideology forms reality, reality changes and bends ideology. And I think in some ways, and I think I speak for both of us, this is a film that we would not have made 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, because our view, our sense of who the Palestinian people are and their relationship to the Jewish people has changed, as it has for so many people, and that's true, obviously, for many Palestinians. So, and there's, as you can see in the film, and as I think we all know, there has been enormous hope along the way in terms of a recognition of the other people, and there's been this equally burdensome despair because somehow the hope on both sides, the desire to somehow make some peace side by side, obviously continues to fail time and time again, and somehow that ultimate, those two sides cannot be brought together. The breach is still there. So,
and just one last thing, it's Mordechai Baron who says that the man at the end about the passage of time, and I think for him as a man, you see that evolution. that recognition. And when Palestinians become real to him as people, and I think for all of us, when Jews become real to, and Israeli Jews become real to Palestinians, and Palestinians become real to Jews and Israelis, I think that's where hope lies.
I noticed that for a lot of people, nationalism and Zionism were the same thing, or they were different things, and there's like a fine line that blurs nationalism and Zionism in Israel. Can you kind of explain that?
Go for it.
Well, I actually think Zionism is Jewish nationalism. There are other forms of Jewish nationalism that don't necessarily take place in the land of Israel. I mean, at the moment the Zionism was being created, there was a form of diaspora nationalism in Eastern Europe. There was the idea of taking the disparate Jewish communities there and somehow binding them together through language and through culture. So there was also the territorialist community. I guess I don't know if they actually called themselves Zionists or territorialists, but they were the ones who thought we could bring the Jews to Buenos Aires or to Kenya or wherever. All we have to do is be together. So it is Jewish nationalism. It's a particular variant of Jewish nationalism. And I think what's interesting about it, of course, it's the only one that succeeded and that could succeed, because there is something, as Yuli says, about the magic of the relationship between Jewish history and the Jewish people in the land of Israel that's very powerful, that was a driver, unlike any of those other forms of nationalism could be.
Well, I just, to add to that, I just don't really know enough about nationalism around the world, but I can say, as somebody who grew up as a Zionist and who grew up with family that embraced Hebrew and the country, I know the love version of it. And we never asked the question until post-78 what difficulty that love equation would create in the lives of the Israelis and the trouble it's caused for us as people who really want to embrace the other, but it's deeply problematic.
I mean, the film, explains a very tumultuous history. For me, I didn't really understand a lot of it until I saw the film, and it taught me what, this history of Zionism is. But I noticed that there's a lot of hope in your film, and I wanted to tell you that because it's, I came out of it, with a lot of questions and thinking a lot about the future and, how, it's up to us to try to make this right, but that's the other thing. I mean, we don't know what right is.
Well, just in terms of the hope, I mean, we made this film for a reason, which is not just to tell history, but because we feel hopeful despite, or I think we both feel hopeful despite perhaps all the evidence, like in Love, and we feel like it's imperative that both our generation, older generations, and younger generations understand the history, because that's where hope lies. And part of our goal is for this film to get out to young people on campuses and get out to older people in Jewish communities, and hopefully reach out to Palestinians and Israelis, and before we go on, I just would like to thank Ilan Kaftal and his family, and I believe they're in the audience, who really wanted to support this film because they are hopeful that if it is used as a study tool and a communication tool, that it will change things. It will change the dynamic. And anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to just to mimic Goran in two ways. One is I'm going to also thank, since we do need to thank people who are out in the audience. Some people who worked on the film who are there today. Bob Peterson, who's our graphics and animation person, is in the audience. And also, I think, and Tricia Fisher is somewhere in the audience. I haven't seen her, but who was very helpful with us in terms of archival research.
And it's possible that Derek Pickering, who shot the opening and closing fabulous shots and came to us through Lowell Handler, who was making a film in Israel. So I wanted to thank you. I haven't met you, but thank you very much. Those shots are exquisite. And I would shoot.
We have some time for some questions from the audience. Just raise your hand and speak up. Well,
yes, go for it.
Okay. A friend of mine said that Israel was the first country to make a peaceful transition from socialism to capitalism. Now, my question is, do you feel, and this did not come across in the film, that the fact that Israel did transform itself and give up the idea of creating a socialist utopia, or at least a just society, do you think the transition to capitalism with all its values had an influence on how Israelis felt about the situation with the Palestinians? You know, me first, you know, I deserve everything, you can go to hell, that's capitalism, right? I'd like to know what you think.
Well, I think there's...
We're on the Upper West Side, I remember.
You can call it capitalism, you can call it nationalism, but in truth, I think no. I mean, I think it's more one of the great flaws. I mean, I'm not going to debate capitalism versus socialism, but the flaws, if anything, have to do with, I think, all national ideas and their blindnesses, as well as, I mean, you know, I am personally a believer in nationalism, and I'm a believer in Jewish nationalism. But as Mordechai Bar-On says, and as Yuli Tamir say, there are blindnesses in nationalism. And in fact, the early socialist people like David Ben-Gurion and others, Golda Meir, were at times as famously blind to the other side as the capitalist Netanyahu or whoever. So I really don't think it can be so simply split.
I would say that Israel is, while it is a capitalist country, it hasn't given up all its socialist flavor and the collective spirit, and it's an incredibly compelling place. My son spent a year there, and we've all spent time there, and that collective identity and that sense, even though yes it's capitalist, but that sense of caring for others and the social justice movement is still quite powerful. So, and I also want to say that capitalism has done, as much as some people might hate capitalism, it's done some remarkable things for the country. And just look at the high-tech industry and the film industry and a lot of other things, and it's just not all bad. It's too easy to say that.
Another question? Go ahead.
The people you had for this, well, it was wonderful. There's so many. What you had like a stellar class of cast of people you interviewed. How did you find them? Just wonderful.
I just want, I see that Bob Simon's here, and I want to thank him for his contributions also. So thank you. Sorry. How did we find these people?
They're really a dime a dozen. And it's true, in Israel, you got a prophet on every corner, and in Palestine too, for that matter. I mean, it was a series. You know, when you make a film like this, you network. One person leads you to another. Some people we knew, some people we discovered. But it really, I mean, it's not a lie to say that the number of incredibly articulate, thoughtful people. I mean, this. For better or worse, Israel is a country that thinks nationalism and has to, you know, morning, noon, and night in many ways. And so you have a remarkable group of people there who can talk so eloquently about this.
I mean, one person did lead to another, but what was really interesting to me, like somebody like Ruth Gavison, who's remarkable and brilliant, a brilliant woman, and I think is a superstar. Many people don't even know her in Israel. It's shocking. So there are, and Saeed Zidani, the Palestinian man who actually came here a few months ago to speak. Just so eloquent and beautiful people. And Avishai knows him. Avishai Margalit recommended him. So it's a process of many ways of finding these people.
We have time for one more question. Yes, ma'am?
Thank you for the film. I know that the politics of the grandfathers are not going to solve the problem, and you sort of speak about the grandchildren on both sides having to solve the problem. But I wondered, while you were in the process of making this film, the recent activity of the Israeli army in the occupied territories, what that does to young people on both sides. We have a Peace Now activists leaving the country. You know, I'm just trying to find the hope in the context of the reality of the present moment. And you were making this film while this took place, and how did that affect you and your vision?
Well, you know, I think, yeah.
How did the present situation with Israeli soldiers in the territories, or I assume in Gaza, and the violence going on, and counter-violence from Palestinians, how did that affect our process? Is that okay?
I mean, the first thing it does is you start to realize you can't worry about including every war in the film, because they keep happening too quickly. And that's a sad and ironic kind of reality. But I think that, you know, when you go to Israel, at least when I will go to Israel, I have both enormous elation and enormous despair at the same time. I mean, the elation is because it's become such an incredibly culturally rich country, and it's developed in my lifetime so remarkably, in all of our lifetimes. I mean, it's just a remarkable thing. On the other hand, and I think this is particularly since the 2000, since the failure of the 2000 peace accords and the building of the wall, and the failure, I think, on both sides to come to agreement, and there was the second Intifada and the resulting repression on the Israeli side. There has been a terrible, terrible split between the two peoples, and that to me is the most despairing thing. That even though the people in our film are very powerfully trying to connect, one feels in the last 13 years a widening of the gap that had started to close. And it can lead to despair. I mean, the most interesting thing that someone said to us, I think, was Gershom Gorenberg. It was kind of, it's the best way I know of looking at this when you feel despair, is he said, you know, if you look at America during the Civil War or prior, you would have been full of despair for the future of America. And, you know, 10, 20, 30 years later, the reality became quite different, up to a point.
Well, we'd say 100 years later, unfortunately.
But in any case, I mean, one has to hopefully take the long view. I mean, it's not just one can't be mired in the present.
Well, Joe took my lines about the Civil War, which is, but I think there's great truth in and hope in the fact that when you meet young Israelis, old Israelis, Israelis of all generations, and that includes Palestinians, and that includes West Bank Palestinians, like the ones you meet in Ramallah, that there are a lot of people who think the same way. And we all know it takes a small minority to destroy that. But you've got to believe, having met as articulate and wonderful people as we have on all sides of the equation, that there's hope for the future. And you have to have the long view. Avishai talks about it in terms of religious time. Well, I guess I'm a believer in religious time, because I believe in Israel. Thank you.
The commercial. We're still raising money for this film, ladies and gentlemen. So if you know anyone who would like to give us money, we're really, really willing to take their money.
And we're hoping for a theatrical release, and we're going to have a theatrical release starting in the summer or fall, and then on from there, television and whatever. So We're absolutely not going to show it in Israel. No, we will absolutely show it in Israel and hopefully internationally. We don't have a plan for that. It all takes a long, long time. Thank you very much for